I would like to follow up on this question of perfectibility, and this obviously leads to the question of education. I would like to start my question to Fania with a conversation I had with Edward Sirota, who is based in Vienna. Edward Sirota is directing a program financed by the US State Department, by the way, of encouraging local history work based in schools and encouraging teachers to develop projects on Jewish history in their local communities, in their classes. And we heard from Fania already earlier today that in some cases teachers have very irritating ideas, to put it that way. And such a project, which seems to be going in Shauna's direction, that everything is getting better slowly, but better over time. There seem to be, well, obstacles, and I would like to invite Fania to comment on how you think the prospects are for a development in this direction.
Thank you. I'm as extra for this itinerary, so I
bonus
think
track.
People are tired. The conference was long, but first of all, I want to start thanking everybody for everything what you tell today, because to speak about Holocaust is never enough. How much we would speak, how much we would write, how much we would discuss, it would not be enough to speak about this very important for us topic. And you know, as a good member of the Lithuanian family, I will try not to take away or not to spread the bad gossips about my country and about my family. I'll try to tell only positive things. So regarding the education, I think that this is the most important mean which we can use today, looking for the future and preventing to repeat such events. First of all. Secondly, that is what we can do for the killed people, in memory of our grandparents. In my family, for example, was one grandma for all the big family, because usually our generation grew up without grandparents. So I just want to tell you that our previous United States ambassador Anderson initiated really a good initiative with a Holocaust education, where the Washington Holocaust Museum took part. And I'm very glad that the ambassador of Lithuania, Asta put all this conference on YouTube. So there is like propaganda without big efforts. The people who are interesting, they can just launch that and listen. And they can choose who is right, who is wrong, or maybe they want to add some comments, or they want to share their opinion with other people. That encourage a lot, because it's very important. You know, Mr. Cohen just now told about one Zhagarin. Can you imagine that in all the Lithuania suddenly the people disappeared? And that how it should be presented to the students, that in their city, in their small town, in their village, well, full of Jews. All the center of the city, all the shops, all the wooden houses, they belong to the Jews, and one day they disappeared. Why? And this is a very important topic which we have to present to our young generation. It's not right then we are reading today in some books for the pupils that this is for the 5 years pupil, that the Jews were killed by Lithuanians because Jews exiled Lithuania to Siberia because they were pushed to do that by Soviets. So everything is like constanta. So the pupil who is reading, can you imagine, the 5-year student, he is 10, 11 years old. He's getting such an information, and it's everything very clear. In the 6th year, he will study that the Jews killed Jesus, but it will not be written that Jesus was a Jew. It will not be written about Roma, about Pontius Pilate, and yes, I can make a copy for you. It is written in the 6th-year student book, and that it's not. I do not have any shame to tell that, because it's not the gossips under somebody's back. We are talking about it all the time. With the previous Minister of the Education will speak about it with the new Minister of the Education, that the education in the school should be on a certain level. Not everybody who can write becomes a writer. Not everybody who can teach is a really very, very nice teacher. And by the way, the part of the program which the ambassador Jersey, the idea of the program is to teach the teachers. And this is, I think, one of the most important our task. If the teachers will know the truth, I hope that they'll tell this truth to the children. It's not enough just formally to tell. They have to feel it. They have to understand. The way, one of the ways they are bringing the teachers now to Yad Vashem, and I think this emotional stress which the people from the small villages, the teachers from the small villages get in Yad Vashem, it's really will have an influence on how do they teach the material about the Holocaust. I think also it's very important to influence the society in the positive way. And I'll share with you what we are trying to do, but unsuccessfully. We want to name one of the streets in Vilnius in the name of the writer. So it's very positive. The writer is a Lithuanian writer. And he did a very good job. And we have to explain, you know, it's funny, but today we have to explain the permission of the municipality. What does it mean, the writer? How many people she saved, and that at least one street should have the name of such important writer as Ona Shemaite, who saved a lot of Jewish children. We want to find a place for the writers among the nations in Vilnius, in the center of the city. And it is also the very positive way. We are not telling, oh, Lithuanians, each day you killed us, and so on and so on. No, we want to encourage the positive initiative, to find the place and to explain the Lithuanians that it is good, that some of them, or it is 700 of them who were awarded by Yad Vashem, and more than 1,000 who were awarded by the President of Lithuania, saved the Jews. And Mr. Sirota, with his project, he's quite a good part of this education, and that what he's doing, it's really a very valuable job. Not long ago he opened a new exhibition in Lithuania, in the Jewish community. We really appreciate his efforts.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the panelists. Is there an urgent need among the panelists to react to things which have been uttered?
I would add something. By and large, I agree with the most of statements and comments made by my colleagues, but I would like to stress one thing which is quite complex and difficult. I have to say that I see some problems which will be very difficult and challenging in Lithuania. If we try to compare some towering figures in our culture, for instance, to our counterparts in other societies and cultures. Suffices it to mention the 1927 generation in Romania, which was made up by people of genius like Nae Ionescu, Mircea Eliade, Emil Cioran. And they were geniuses, and they were to become great Parisian celebrities, as we know. But you know that they were profoundly anti-Semitic in their young days, and they were very close to the Iron Guard in Romania. So the most of them subscribed to the views of General Antonescu when he came to power. So, and I remember it was in my young days that my mentor and friend in the United States, an emigre sociologist, Vytautas Kavolis, was the first who started comparing Antanas Maceina, a Lithuanian Catholic philosopher, to Mircea Eliade and Eugene Ionescu, clearly implying that there were some Catholic intellectuals in Lithuania before the Second World War who felt quite pro-Nazi and who were very profoundly anti-Semitic. And I guess that this is a very difficult part for Lithuania, because when it comes to people like Juozas Girnius, who is a famous philosopher, an emigre philosopher, and who wrote a review, who reviewed Mein Kampf. I read this text, and I reviewed his review of Mein Kampf. And I have to say that he was praising Mein Kampf up to the skies in his young days. It may come as a shock to most of the young intellectuals in Lithuania. I wrote about it, but I think that it will take many years. I'm not so naive as to expect this to happen overnight. So I think it will take more than 2-3 decades to come to terms that some luminaries and a gallery of saintly figures, they were profoundly anti-Semitic, and they were subscribing to the views of the Nazis at some point. Maceina wrote a program for the Lithuanian Activist Front, which was acknowledged by Canon Shirpa. So I guess it will be a very difficult part. No, this is not to say that, you know, these people should be simply excluded from the gallery of Lithuanian thinkers and great people of letters. No, not at all. But we have to react like some Romanian colleagues who clearly see that Ionescu in his young days, or Eliade or Cioran, were reactionaries. They were very reactionary, and they were quite dangerous in their political views, and the political implications of their philosophies were really toxic. And we have to do the same. We cannot regard, you know, our culture as absolutely innocent in the 20th century. So, and this is a very difficult homework for Lithuania, so I guess it will take many, many years. It will be very difficult, very challenging. And this is not to say that I'm inviting to dismiss a big part of Lithuanian philosophy, not at all. That would be absolutely simplistic and stupid thing to do. But I'm simply saying that it will be difficult, but I expect Lithuania to be able to tackle this. Because, look, my final point would be that I mentioned it last night that there was a time when Thomas Venclova was a lonely voice, a voice in the void, so to say. And we know that the Jews and the Lithuanians, his essay, published in Israel in 1977. So that was a uniquely courageous and brave document of a Lithuanian poet and translator. Later on, I knew that some emigrant Lithuanian liberals, like Kavolis or Algirdas Julius Greimas in Paris, or Liudas Moskūnas in Chicago, they said that they would have signed such a document. They subscribed to his point of view. But at the same time, we know that Thomas Venclova was not awfully popular among a big part of Lithuanian literati, so to say. But I have to say that in fact many things, much has been improved and many things have changed in Lithuania. So now Venclova is not a lonely voice. Much to my delight, I have to say that there are many people, and including Franciscan brothers mentioned by Professor Beisait and some other young people, who are making the same points and who are exposing themselves. But my final point would be that I agree that Andrius Kubilius and the Lithuanian government made beautiful gestures, very benevolent, very kind gestures, but there are some discrepancies. And as a Lithuanian saying goes, sometimes the right hand doesn't know what the left hand does. You know, you cannot, and one at the same time, to show sympathy to the victims and the perpetrators of the Holocaust. It's impossible to do things like that. So you cannot organize or to finance the reburial of Abrazavichus, showing the sympathy for the Holocaust survivors and the victims of the Holocaust. You have to make up your mind. So at this point, even if there is some pressure, even if there is such a devilish aspect of human life as very, very sensitive issues of parents and offspring, which is the case in the Lithuanian political class, let me be absolutely open on this. So, but we have to be absolutely principled on this, and we cannot make two beautiful gestures at the expense of one silly thing. So, But these are very painful lessons, and I do believe that Lithuania will be courageous and benevolent and magnanimous enough to come to very important conclusions.
Perhaps to add that these problems of deciding whom to laud and whom to condemn are not uniquely Lithuanian. We have other examples in many other European countries and very controversial decisions which are comparable to the reburial of Pavlos Vicius. So this is also perhaps an important element in the reflection of issues Lithuanian, that some things are not uniquely Lithuanian.
I have also very small comments too. The politics is very important and of course very interesting, but the education is the most important. And like to stress that in Poland we teach in our courses more than 1,000 teachers, secondary school teachers, and we started to show, to tell what was the Jewish culture, because the synagogues are destroyed, because nobody knows what it means kosher, but nobody knows that Jews spoke Yiddish and so on, so on. They're very rudimental problems. And after 1 week course, the teachers started to organize the exchange with Israeli students. We have a lot of groups. Poland was the biggest center of the Jewish diaspora. So thousands of young Jews come to Poland to visit. Before they visited only the killing center, Auschwitz, Treblinka and the others. Now one day is concerned to meeting with Polish students and to organize common enterprise to go to Disco and so on, so on. That is absolutely necessary to start with teachers and after with students. It's my remark.
Thank you.
My name is Odile Suganas, and I would like to just to report that, as you said about education about the children, and I had a book translated into Lithuanian, and this book is being distributed to the school in Lithuania, and especially I was invited in a secondary school in Butrimonis, Baltermans, and it was a very fruitful experience. The children were asking me many questions, and this took place in December 2007, you know. Butrimonis is the place where my mother was, my grandfather was there, my mother was there, and it is part of my family. And I must say that at the end, an history teacher told me, would you like to know where is your great-grandfather mill was? I said, of course, yes. And of course the mill was not there anymore, but the foundation, she showed me the foundation. But all the ceremony which took place with the children of the school, the secondary school, was extremely fruitful. And I was told the same thing when I went to the 9th Force in Kovno, in Kaunas, and Mrs. Menchunian at that time told me, could we have some more books for the children? That means that a work has started in Lithuania about educating the children.
My name is Michael Edelman. You've got a huge challenge in front of you. But having said that, you are obviously a highly acclaimed group of academics, and I'm sure your influence in the future, hopefully, will bear some fruit. What I've written down here is that the one defining so-called pleasurable pursuit in the UK and in Europe is soccer, otherwise known as football. But the level or levels of anti-Semitism in the UK compared to Lithuania or Europe as one continent, I cannot compare because I don't know the difference between the Lithuanian anti-Semitism that takes place in football, but I know that it takes place here. on a very unpleasant and uncomfortable level. How to address the current weak argument of Israeli politics and wars encouraging anti-Semitism, i.e. a war that happens in Israel should not be encouraging anti-Semitism. I think to me, this seems like a weak characteristic on the part of Europeans. And what to do for a more sportsmanlike and acceptable anti-xenophobic attitude, also affecting other minorities, as in communities as i.e. the black community in this country as well, also suffer huge amounts of xenophobia as non-Jews. So it's across the board.
The Lithuanian national sport is basketball, not football.
Well, the national sport in Israel is basketball.
No, in Lithuania.
Oh, in Lithuania, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know. In Israel as well. Thank you very much.
Several of the speakers referred to the issue raised by the Prague Declaration, which is how does one incorporate the crimes of Stalinist Russia, of the Stalinist Soviet Union, into a European narrative. And I think this is a central issue. I'm not sure that there's an easy answer. I would say a couple of things, however. Firstly, I agree with Yehuda Bauer that the term unique, which in my view is a Jewish cry of pain, is by and large something to be avoided in discussing the Holocaust. What Bauer suggested instead of unique was unprecedented. I think that, as Stephen Katz pointed out in the third volume of his History of the Holocaust, uniqueness is a concept which is very difficult to use. Everything is both unique and can be compared to other things. He gives the example there of the finches on the Galapagos Islands, which were investigated by Darwin, all of which are unique in that their beaks are somewhat different, but to non-ornithologists they all look the same. So we clearly have to have a narrative in which these two regimes are set side by side, and in which the crimes committed by these regimes are incorporated and explained. I agree here, I mean, it's my feeling here that the weakness, I said this yesterday, but I will repeat it, that the weakness of Holocaust education between Eastern Europe and particularly in a place like Lithuania. And here I would say I'm very much for the comparison of Poland and Lithuania. I'm very glad that Andrzej is here. But it's very important for us who have experience of Eastern Europe to remember that the experience of Lithuania was different from the experience of Poland. From 1956, Poland was de facto independent. I mean, obviously final decisions were taken in Moscow, but this was effectively a consensual authoritarian system. One could get away with a great deal in Poland. When I was a student, I remember Andrzej Gawlicki saying, you can write on anything except after 1939. This was not the situation in Lithuania. The experience of being part of the Soviet Union and Mr. Cohen quoted the Holocaust, the genocide, UN Genocide Declaration, which is of course drafted by Lemkin. I think that the double genocide, like the Prague Declaration, can be exploited. But to say that the goal of Soviet policy from, let's say, 1944 to 1960 was to destroy in whole or in part the substance of the Lithuanian nation, this doesn't seem to me to be that remote from the truth. Maybe we should just get rid of this term genocide, but I think the priority in the larger narratives that we are developing is to have a history which deals with both of these. I'm not sure how we should do this, but this seems to me a very high priority.
I guess there's a kind of mirror image weakness in education in Central Europe of the history of the Holocaust, and in the West, and certainly in the United States, of the history of Stalin's crimes. So, you know, in theory, perhaps through mutual exchanges, educational exchanges and so on, that might be one way to begin to tackle that. I mean, if you take away unique, Anthony, from the Holocaust and call it unprecedented, you know, well, lots of things are unprecedented. I mean, our holding this conference in this room is unprecedented. And what then are you going to call the Gulag or you know, Stalin's crimes? Are you going to call them unprecedented, or are you going to call them? I mean, it seems to me, having visited, you know, when I was based in Berlin and covering I mean, obviously, I thought a lot about this, and went to all the, not only the concentration camps in Germany, but all the death camps. It seems to me it's unique.
Thank you. There's already a long. There's already a long.
Very briefly, one thing. Of course, it's a very complex discussion, but briefly I will respond by. First and foremost, Professor Polonsky, I guess the problem is that, well, sometimes it's a public secret that there is much of adoption of Goebbels rhetoric and propaganda, which equates a Bolshevik and a Jew. The equation of Bolshevism and Jews makes a very, very difficult problem in the context of East and Central Europe. And when it comes to people who said that, you know, sometimes the resistance fighters were killing not Jews but communists, well, here we are. We have a problem here. So before we come to any academic procedure, any comparison, we have to come to terms with the vocabulary, with a conceptual framework, and we have to put aside all remnants of this misanthropic vocabulary and this Goebbels propaganda. So only then I can imagine, you know, people do something just trying to restore, you know, a decent academic comparison. And another problem is that still I remember that was a very hot subject among Russian dissidents when Grigory Pomeranz suggested that straticide would be a more accurate term to describe what was happening in the Soviet Union. I guess that Alexander Stromas was quite close to this idea as well, suggesting that that was about the elimination of the elite, not the entire nation, not the entire people. And I guess that in fact it was understood by Russian dissidents that, you know, whereas the Nazis deprived the Jews of the possibility to become a traitor, you couldn't betray, you wouldn't be killed anyway. So there was a very, very strong possibility left to Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, and Poles to side with the occupying force, with the force majeure, so to say. You could betray your country and you could survive.
Yes.
That was not an option for the Jews. That was not an option. So that's why we have to state it openly. So at this point there is no comparison as far as the ethical choice to betray your country is concerned. The Jews were deprived of the possibility to betray. They were simply chosen as a target group. So, and this creates something unprecedented or unique. Whereas to kill the elite, to eliminate the elite, well, since Machiavelli we know that that's an option during the warfare. To eliminate the elite of the country, to kill the elite. So this is not to minimize Stalinism. This is not to minimize the crimes of the Soviet. And this is not to minimize the profoundly anti-Semitic character of the Soviet regime. But we have to come to terms just to initiate a decent procedure. Because I think that some leftovers, some intellectual and logical leftovers, you know, from those days when double genocide theory or an idea of the equation of Jews and Bolshevism, I'm just afraid to think are still there.
But why? Why do you think that Goebbels' propaganda, the notion that all Jews were Bolsheviks, why is that idea, if not alive and well in Lithuania, at least very much in circulation? I mean, Goebbels was speaking 70 years ago, and you know, most people, at least in the West, know what they think of Nazi propaganda. Why are Lithuanians still unclear as to what they should think about it?
Academics and historians know that this is nonsense, of course, but you, I think, Mr. Cohen, you gave an answer. Frozen history. 5 decades of isolation, lies, total lies, and here you are. So it's impossible to compare the intellectual atmosphere of Western Europe or North America, where it was possible to debate this. And just imagine a society which didn't know anything about itself for 5 decades, where the Jews were not Jews but Soviet citizens, where the tragedies of Lithuania were hidden from Lithuanians at the same time. So this is about the distortion of the past. And I'm just afraid that this is what happens when you have to confront your past, which was hidden from your sight for such a long time. So, and I'm just afraid that this is a shock, this is a continuous shock, which I expect to continue in the coming decades. It's not a very easy thing to overcome. We can do something with the doctoral students, with PhD candidates. We can do something with scholars. This is possible to achieve, but I don't think it is realistic of us to expect a miracle to happen overnight. And, you know, young people who are simply, you know, fed with stereotypes and cliches to think like Professor Polonsky. That would be nonsense. So we have to understand, we are a traumatized country, we're a traumatized society, with lies, with each part of legacy.
Maybe my comment is coming from my context in South Africa. Like Mr. Cohen, my background is Lithuanian and South African. And it's a response to something that Dr. Donska said about not excluding from the canon people who were toxic in their political views. My response is something in reverse. It's while you can't include in that canon people whose views were toxic without grappling with them, I would also caution against incorporating into the Lithuanian canon Litvaks who chose after the war, who survived, who chose after the war never to have anything to do with Lithuania again. So while I think there's an important dialogue to be had, and there is that incorporation and integration to do, it has to be done with great sensitivity and great integrity. And my concern is that the people who are best represented to be doing that kind of work are not currently included in this particular debate. And I think it comes at the risk, it potentially risks the authenticity of and the sincerity of this appeal to have that integration.
My name's Sonia Foster, I work for BBC Television. I hate the fact we're using a radio mic like this. They're very expensive, and you should be aware of it. It upsets me.
The mic is a big hit.
I very much like Mr. Donska's comments, and I feel that what one should always bear in mind in conferences like this is the Terror House in Budapest. Terror House in Budapest is a prime example of how you should not look at this notion of double genocide. It is insulting both the Jews who were killed and insulting to the people who were killed under communism. It makes comparisons that are valid and in one way but in another completely banal. And it concerns me that we still are debating this here. Of course people suffered under communism, and of course people suffered under the Holocaust in a way that is extraordinary by both the rapidity and the systematic ruthlessness, which is a different kind of ruthlessness from the ruthlessness of communism. It's not a daily ruthlessness, it's a kind of immediate ruthlessness. And it seems to me very worrying that we want to make those comparisons. These are two very different things, two very different organisations. And it worries me also that we see in Hungary nowadays, and I don't know for any other at all, that indeed anti-Semitism has risen again, that it is always the Jews that get blamed. I've done many reports for the BBC and we see that it is always the Jews. Quite extraordinary. And you hear the same things. You talked about Goebbels, well, you hear the same kind of rhetoric. You see,
it's worse.
It's worse. No, it's worse.
No comparison.
No comparison. There's no comparison.
In Lithuania, things like this are impossible. Parliament members cannot make statements like Mr. Dangusi.
Yes.
Simply impossible.
Or indeed like Jobbik, or indeed like...
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
We don't have 17 fascists sitting in the parliament. Look, no
but
comparison.
the problem with Fidesz, and the problem which the European Union have, and I'm sorry to ask a question, I know it's naughty and I apologise, is that it's a hugely democratically elected government. So what can you as an MEP or as a European Union do against such a, it's something like 70%?
Comment regarding Mr. Cohen's presentation. By the way, I'm a great admirer of Mr. Cohen. I read his columns regularly in the New York Times. And I remember very well his article, The Last Jew in Jagad, which was published in November of last year. So I'm very much looking forward to his book, and I found your presentation very moving. So thank you for that. And I should also just very quickly mention that, do you know who was born, the most famous possibly person born in Jagade? Salanka. Yes. The founder of, or the father of the Musar movement was born in Jagade. So that's a fact that some of you obviously didn't know. And the other thing is, I was in Ireland with my wife in the mid-80s, and because I have an interest in all kinds of things, I found out that one of the most famous Irish cricketers, stroke footballers, who died during the war, also came from Jagade, Lewis Bookman. I mean, if you go to Ireland, that's revered. So Lewis Bookman from Jagade. Very little known fact. He migrated with his parents from Jagade at the end of the 19th century. I think it was born around 1890 and died around 1943. Again, a little small fact. Now, I'll finish with one little comment, and that is, I agree absolutely that we need more memorial plaques in Lithuania, but there are over 200 recognized Holocaust sites. They all have plaques, but of course they won't all be in the center of a city or a town. And where Jagade is, this is a very minor thing, is in fact a town of about 2,000 people. But in 1939, the population was 5,400 and something. And of course, overnight, it went down. So that's terrible beyond words. And that is unique. And unprecedented.
Sorry, un-Jewish characteristic. Someone raised the point of Israel, and I want to continue that. A very problem today is that the Jewish establishment, especially in America and Britain, equates criticism of Israel with its present attitude vis-à-vis the Palestinians with anti-Semitism. It occurs like this in the Jewish press. And there was a time, post-67 war, when tens of thousands of youth from the West and some from the East went to Israel because it was a country with a great, it showed a great pioneering spirit and democratic spirit. Today, that very same youth, we always joke, not joke, but say seriously, the young people that came to kibbutzim to help to build after the 67 war were the same kind of young people that went to Rafiach and tried to stop the bulldozing of our houses. The younger generation, and we have to address this, the younger generation sees the Israel-Palestine problem as critical to their way of thinking in a progressive way. And the Jewish establishment doesn't realize that by equating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, they are destroying the ability of these people to speak freely, and also making anti-Semitism something which it isn't. The criticism of Israel is legitimate. The anti-Semitism is not. It needs to be a decoupling, and somehow, I think in Eastern Europe, a similar thing will happen. You'll get young people who are thinking idealistically, and they will look at Israel-Palestine conflict, and if the Jews continue to equate that with anti-Semitism, it's a great danger, especially in countries which are recovering from anti-Semitism like Eastern Europe. And so I would make say if anyone has any influence with the Jewish establishment, to slap them around the ears somehow to make them realize this.
No, we cannot leave this unanswered. I am very sorry. I am very sorry. We cannot leave this unanswered. The Jews are not guilty for anti-Semitism. This is the same philosophy of the Nazis. We kill Jews because of them, not because of the Nazis. Israel and the government of Israel is not, I repeat, not guilty for anti-Semitism.
Thank you. Nobody said this. I think that was not the intention. We have a number of very big issues which remain open and which will require continued debate.